Hello everyone! Today we are going to learn how to knit this Harry Potter house scarf themed coaster. This one is done in Gryffindor. The one I'm going to do today is in Hufflepuff, but you can pick whichever house you want, or you can do different colors just for the fun of it. It's up to you, it's your coaster. This is knit entirely using knit and purl stitches for this little ribbed effect. It's reversible and it works very well for holding your drink and keeping your table safe. To knit our coasters, we're going to need first a set of knitting needles. I'm using a size 7 needle. You can use bigger needles or smaller needles. You may just have to adjust the amount of stitches that you cast on for this to make sure that yours is the size that you want. Next, you're going to need yarn, and we'll need 2 colors for this. I'm using gold and black since I wanted a Hufflepuff scarf. Then you'll need a pair of scissors to trim the edges off when you get to the end of each color. And you'll need a needle or a crochet hook, just something you can use to weave in the ends of your strings and give it a nice clean edging when we're done. To start our coaster, we're going to cast on 24 stitches. I'm going to use a method called the long tail cast on, but you can use whichever one you know or prefer. So on the left side, I've got my long tail, and on the right side, I've got my ball of yarn. Scoot that out of the way a little bit so I have room to work. So we're going to start off with just a little loop slid on your needle. Make sure that you keep your work a little bit loose so you have room to move it and knit. You're going to put your fingers in between these 2 strands, scoop them together until it looks a little bit like this. Take your needle to the left hand, kind of go up the thumb and pull that outer string, and then to your pointer finger, pull that inner string, go into the loop. Catch it with your thumb and pull it to try to leave a little bit of room for it to work. So the outer strand on your thumb, inner strand on your finger, through the loop, and then pull it too. And we're just going to do this until we have 24 stitches. Now that you should have 24 stitches on your needle, you can pause and double check, make sure. You're going to hold your needle in your left hand, make sure you get the tail out of the way, and we're going to work with that. And we're going to knit 1 stitch, purl 1 stitch across the row, and we're going to do that for 3 rows, and that's going to make the bottom edge of our coaster. So to start with, to knit, we're just going to go into this loop from the front, wrap the yarn around, pull it through, slide it off, and then to purl, move your yarn to the front of the right hand needle, and go into the back of that loop, wrap it around, slide it through, and pull it off. So move your yarn back to the back of the needle. We're going to knit this stitch, so in through the front, wrap it around, slide it off. So back to the front, go in through the back, wrap it around, and slide it off. I'm going to do just alternating between knit and purl all the way across the row. We're going to do that until we have 3 rows on our needles. So now that we have 3 rows in our main color of that knit purl ribbing, we're going to pick up our second color, so you can scoot your main color up out of the way and then get ready. We're going to do 2 rows of the exact same knit purl stitch work, but this time we're going to use our second color. So we're just going to add that in. You're going to want to leave a little bit of tail so you have some room to work with it. And we're just going to knit 1, purl 1 all the way across. And we're going to do that for 2 rows. to make our first thin stripe in that second color that we're using. And once you get to the end of the row, you're just gonna work your way back to where the black started, or whatever your second color is, and then we're going to have 2 rows in this second color. So we're just gonna flip it, get that up out of the way, and then come back and do a second row in our second color. When we get done with that, we'll pick back up our main color. So just keep working. All right, so now we should have 3 rows in this first color and then 2 rows in our second color. And we're gonna tuck the second color back out of the way for a second, and we're gonna pick up again with our first color, and we're gonna knit 2 rows, again with that knit 1 and then purl 1 rib stitching all the way across, and we're going to do that in 2 rows, and then we're going to pick back up and do the second stripe of our second color. So we're nearing the end of this row, and then we're going to turn it and go back and do the second row in this color before we switch back to our second color for a second. So we're just going to carefully flip that over, and then we're going to come back across, knit purl for our second row. So now we have 2 rows in our main color, and we're going to switch it back to our second color. Make sure you grab the right string for this, not the little tail there. And we're going to do again 2 rows, knit purl with your second color just all the way across and all the way back. Knit 1 and then purl 1. And then you're just going to carefully flip it back over, and we're going to knit our last row using this second color before we switch back to the main color to finish the coaster. So again, just knit purl back and forth. Until you get through your second row. So now we should have 2 stripes in our second color. Both of them are going to be 2 rows of knit purl ribbing with that little main color stripe in the middle that's also 2 rows. And we're actually done with our second color, so you can make a nice little tail there and just cut it off and set it out of the way and pick back up your first color, and we're going to knit purl rib again for the next 9 rows. So you're just going to pick it up and we're going to do 9 rows with our main color to finish it off. Make sure you grab the right string there. There's a couple hanging in the way. So we're going to do 9 rows, knit 1, and then purl 1, and then we're going to learn how to bind it off. There's a couple different methods you can use for that to just take it off the needles and smooth it out. We're about halfway there, so we're just going to do 9 rows back and forth of this knit 1, purl 1 stitch, all using that main color. Just going to turn it and continue for another 8 rows until we get it to a good square coaster shape. And just knit purl all the way to the end. Alright, so now that we have our last 9 rows in this main color, we're going to bind it off and get all of these stitches off the needle in a way that secures them. If you know a different way of binding off, you're welcome to use that. This is the way that I typically do. We're just going to knit that first stitch and then purl the second stitch. We're going to follow our knit purl pattern for this so that it has that same kind of shaping. So you're going to knit the first one and then purl the second one. We're going to take that first stitch, slide your needle into it. We're going to slide it over the second stitch and off the needle. So we've got that one's purled, and now we're going to knit this next stitch. Take that purl stitch from a second ago and slide it over. Now we need to purl. We're just going to do this all the way across our row of stitches, maintaining that knit purl pattern. You can see it's kind of securing. These are no longer loose and hanging there. They're tucked off. Just going to slide this one over. So just keep going. Knit 1, purl 1, sliding those stitches off as you go. Until you get to the end. It does get a little bit awkward to hold everything together when you get to that last little corner. Just keep going until you get to the very last stitch. So here we go, we're going to purl our last stitch, slide the needle in, tuck it over, and then we should be able to take our needles out and get them out of the way. And take your little loop there. I always pull a little bit long to make sure it doesn't come out. And we can cut the yarn, and then I usually loop it through. Alright, so all that's left is weaving at our ends. So you're going to take your needle. If you don't have a proper darning needle, I believe I'm using a tapestry needle actually. Instead of a darning needle, it's the one I happen to have available, and you just kind of weave it in. Try to weave the black into the black sections here instead of the yellow. You can use it to hide some of these yellow gaps that are around where our color change was. I try to make sure that I weave all of my ends into the same side so that way any strings that might poke out are all poking out on the same side. And you just kind of weave it in a little bit, and then when you're done, you trim it off very close to the end of that coaster. Leave a little bit of string, and now you've got a little coaster. If you want to smooth out the edges a little bit, you can get a little bit damp in a system called blocking. You just get a little bit damp, you can get some pins and kind of pin it to a piece of spare cardboard and shape it a little bit to kind of smooth out these slightly wonky edges, or you can just use it as is.